By the summer of 2019, Nora Vetch was running the smallest operation in Benton County, Missouri, on the least impressive equipment anyone had seen in that valley in 2 decades. And she did not appear to mind. She hauled hay on a 1989 Ford F-350 that pulled left. She kept her records in a composition notebook she bought at the Dollar General in Warsaw. She was 19 years old, and she owned, outright, 12 W10X22 steel I-beams that she had purchased from the Benton County Highway Department for $340 the previous November, and which had been sitting tarped on her father's property for 7 months without explanation. Her father, Ray Vetch, told it later the way men like him tell things, starting with what he got wrong. He had not asked her what the beams were for. He had assumed she was going to sell them for scrap metal at a better price than the county had bothered to negotiate, which was the kind of thing Nora did. The kind of quiet, steady arbitrage that people her age weren't supposed to know how to do. He had watched her unload them with a borrowed Case 580 backhoe and stack them on timber sleepers behind the machine shed and cover them with a tarp she weighted with concrete blocks. And he had not asked. He didn't find out until the water was already rising. This is a story about a girl who saw something nobody else was looking for. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, this channel is for you. Subscribe before we go further. She is 23 now. She is still in Benton County. The operation is not the smallest one in the valley anymore, but in November of 2018, she was a 19-year-old with $340 in discretionary money and a reason she hadn't shared with anyone. Standing at a Benton County surplus auction in the parking lot of the Highway Department maintenance barn in Warsaw, looking at 12 rusted W Section 1 beams that had come off the old Hazel Creek Road bridge when the county replaced it with a precast concrete span. The beams were 22 feet long. They had surface rust on the bottom flanges and some minor section loss at the bearing ends. But the web was solid, and the steel was old growth, the kind of thick, slow-poured structural steel from the early 1960s that doesn't exist in the commodity market anymore. The county wanted them gone. The scrap price that week was running about $185 a ton, and 12 W10X22 beams at 22 feet came out to roughly 2 tons of steel. The county had priced the lot at $400 to make it easy. Nora had offered $340, and they had taken it. There were no other bidders. Dennis Hartley, who drove the county road grader and had been on that crew for 16 years, watched her load them and said he didn't know what a girl that age wanted with bridge beams. He was not unkind about it. He just didn't know. Neither did anyone else. What Nora Vetch knew about water had come from her grandfather, Clyde Vetch, who had died in March of 2015 at the age of 82, and who had spent a significant portion of his adult life watching the Osage River rise and fall through the bottom ground of Benton County. Clyde had homesteaded the west parcel when he was 26 years old, in 1958, and he had immediately made one decision that everyone else in the valley considered either eccentric or wasteful. He had dug his access lane 8 feet higher than the natural grade of the bottomland and bridged it over the seasonal drainage swale at the south end of the property with a pair of steel beams and a poured concrete deck. His neighbors had put in culverts or simple timber crossings because that was faster, cheaper, and because a drainage swale was not a river. In a normal year, they were right. Clyde had grown up watching his own father lose access to bottom fields 3 times in the 1940s, when the drainage swales in this valley backed up from the Osage during sustained rain events and turned into channels that weren't on any county map. The culverts plugged with debris. The timber crossings floated. For a week in 1947, Clyde's father could not get a truck out of the south parcel at all, and he lost 2 days of the hay window and a week of cattle moving that he never fully recovered in that season. Clyde was 9 years old. He did not forget it. He told Nora about it once, sitting on the tailgate of the old Dodge W200 he kept in the machine shed. Not as a lesson, not as a warning, just as one of the things that had happened. He was 71 at the time. She was 8. She did not understand why he was telling her, but she listened the way some children listen, without interrupting, without deciding whether it was interesting, just taking it in. He told her a few other things over the years, also from the tailgate of that truck, also without announcing that they were lessons. How to read a soil profile from the color of the water in a fresh dug post hole. How to tell the difference between a tile line that was draining and one that was plugged by watching where the field dried after rain. How to estimate the load-bearing capacity of a drainage crossing by looking at the span and the fill depth and the section of the steel. He had learned that last one from a USTA extension publication from 1963 that he kept in the glove box of the truck, folded and refilled, until it fell apart. Nora had read the publication when she was 14. She had read it the way you read something you want to be able to use. She did not inherit the publication. It was gone by the time Clyde died. But she had read it enough times that the principles were in her somewhere in the way things are when you read them young and slow. She had been watching the south swale on the Vetch property for 2 years before she bought the beams. She had watched it in the wet spring of 2017 and the wet fall of 2018. The county had extended the ditch line along Hazel Creek Road by 300 feet in 2016, which had changed the watershed above the swale in a way that wasn't on any current drainage map. Nora had walked the ditch line in rubber boots the previous October and stood at the outlet point and done some rough arithmetic in her head about what an extended ditch meant for the swale's peak flow rate in a sustained event. She was not an engineer. She had not studied hydrology. She had walked the ground and looked at the water and thought about what Clyde had told her and what she felt. She told it this way later, and she said she knew it sounded imprecise, was that the culvert at the south crossing was not going to be enough. The existing crossing was a corrugated steel culvert pipe, 18 inches in diameter, set in compacted fill. On a normal year, it was fine. On a bad year, Nora thought, it would plug. She wanted to replace it with a bridge span, a proper one. Steel beams on concrete abutments, open bottom, no pipe to plug. The problem was money. New W-section beams, cut to length, delivered, ran somewhere north of $2,200 for a 2-beam span even at the thin end of the market. She did not have $2,200 for a project that her father considered unnecessary and that she had not yet explained to him. When she saw the county's surplus listing in November of 2018, she did the section math before she called. W10X22 at 22 feet, adequate span for the crossing with a foot of bearing on each end, more than enough load rating for a loaded grain truck or an anhydrous ammonia applicator, the 2 heaviest things that would ever use that lane. The surface rust was cosmetic. The section loss at the bearing ends was minor. A wire brush and a coat of cold galvanizing compound, and they would be fine for 30 years. She bought all 12 because she needed 2 for the crossing, and wasn't sure she had the section loss figured exactly right, and because the price for 12 was $340, and the price for 2 would have been a conversation she didn't want to have. She stacked them behind the machine shed and covered them, and did not explain. The rain started on the 14th of June 2019, and it did not stop for 11 days. What fell in Benton County in those 11 days was not, by itself, historic. What made it historic was that it fell on ground that was already saturated from a wet May. And it fell on a watershed where the Osage River had already climbed to the bottom of its banks. And it fell on a county where the drainage ditches were running full before the second day was out. The south swale on the Vetch property went from its normal 6-inch trickle to a channel 3 feet deep and 12 feet wide by the morning of June 18th. The corrugated culverts on the 4 neighboring properties in the drainage shed, 2 on the Gannett parcels to the east, 1 on the old Dillard place, 1 on the county's own Field Road, plugged in sequence over a 36-hour period as debris from the saturated upland moved downstream and stacked against the pipe inlets. The plugged culverts backed water into the access lanes. The access lanes became impassable. The Vetch South crossing held. Nora had installed the beams the previous March with a rented Bobcat T650, and her younger brother Garrett working the concrete forms. It had taken them 4 days. Ray Vetch had watched without comment for the first day and a half before he asked what she was doing, and she told him. He stood there for a moment. He said all right. He went back to the machine shed. During the flood, every farm in the south drainage shed lost road access for between 4 and 9 days. 3 of them had cattle that needed moving and couldn't move them. 1 of them had a custom cutter scheduled for early corn and had to cancel. The Vetch operation had access the entire time. Ray hauled grain for 2 of his neighbors using the south lane as the only passable route to the blacktop. He charged them his fuel cost and nothing else. Word of this travels fast in a farm community and slow everywhere else. By July, 4 of the neighboring operations had asked Nora about the crossing. She told them what she had done and what it had cost. She told them about the beams, what to look for in a surplus listing, what section to specify for a given span. She did not charge for the advice. 2 of them built crossings before the following spring. The other 2 are still on culverts. Nora says she doesn't know why. She says some things you have to see for yourself. Dennis Hartley, the road grader driver, heard about the crossing that fall. He said he still didn't know what a girl that age had wanted with bridge beams. He had said it the same way in November of 2018, and he said it the same way in October of 2019. He wasn't wrong the first time. He just didn't know what she knew. That's the distinction Clyde Vetch would have made. He didn't think people who didn't see things coming were foolish. He thought they just hadn't had the right conversation at the right time with the right person. He had tried to be that person for Nora. He had done it from the tailgate of the old Dodge, with a 60-year-old Usta pamphlet in the glove box, talking about water the way you talk about an old neighbor, specific about its habits, patient with its nature, careful not to underestimate what it could do when it had the room. The pamphlet is gone. The truck is gone, but the crossing is there, and it held, and it will hold the next time too, because the people who built it understood where the water was going to go before it went there. That is most of what Clyde left. It was enough.